All right. Thank you everyone for joining today. We will be presenting on InnovateMass, one of our MassCC Technology Development Grant programs. Just to give a brief overview of the agenda today, we'll start by giving introductions and an overview of what we do at MassCC. Then we'll get into InnovateMass as a program, including some important updates we made to the program. And then last, we'll hold a question and answer period. As a matter of housekeeping, all of the attendees are in listen only mode. And please submit your questions in the question box throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website within about a week after this webinar. I'm Corey Grunwald. I'm a program administrator at MassCC, and I work on the InnovateMass program as well as several of our other technology development programs. We also have Leslie Nash, who is a program manager at MassCC, who oversees our technology development programs as well as some of our incubator programs and water programs. So at MassCC, our mission is to grow the state's clean energy industry while helping to meet the Commonwealth's clean energy, climate, and economic development goals. We aim to invest in programs that increase renewable energy adoption by residents, businesses, and communities. We also aim to connect employers, job seekers, students, communities, and investors to the broader clean energy industry. We also, in our technology development programs, aim to spur innovation, and that's partially through technology development support and also through infrastructure and other forms of funding. Just to get into our technology development programs, the programs in green on this graph are grant programs, and the programs in blue are investment programs. Kind of all along the technology readiness level x-axis, we have the internship program, which runs 3 solicitations a year and essentially pays for clean energy internships at companies in the Commonwealth. And then Catalyst runs 2 solicitations a year, and that's focused on prototyping projects to kind of de-risk early stage clean energy technologies. And those grants are up to $65,000. Then kind of all the way up to 500K and all along the technology readiness level axis, we have InnovateMass, which is intended to serve as cost share to large research grants, such as those provided by the Department of Energy or the National Science Foundation. And then today, we will be focusing on InnovateMass, which funds demonstration projects for developing clean energy technologies. As you can see, this is a bit further on the technology readiness scale, so kind of past the de-risking research and the prototyping and sort of pre-commercialization. Now I will let my colleague, Leslie Nash, take over.
Great, thanks, Corey. And good afternoon, everyone. As Corey mentioned earlier, my name is Leslie Nash. I am a program manager at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and I do oversee the InnovateMass program and a variety of our other technology development grant programs, as well as some of our ecosystem support programs more generally. And I'm excited here today to present to you the new InnovateMass program, which I will get into on the next slide. So here are a few kind of high level points of the program, all of which we will get into a lot more detail in subsequent slides. But just to give a little bit of context, particularly for those who might already be familiar with MassCC's InnovateMass program, MassCC has run InnovateMass since 2013. The program has taken a few different forms over the years, and in more recent rounds, the program was restricted to Massachusetts-based startup companies only. However, as you will learn in this presentation today, that is one of the aspects of the program that has been changed for this current round and moving forward. There are some other smaller programmatic changes as well, all of which I will get into in more specifics later in the presentation. The InnovateMass program offers grants of up to $250,000 with a 25 to 50% cost share requirement, depending on the type of project, again, which we will get into more specifics later slides. The program also offers third-party technical support throughout the project term. The program opened on June 8th, so very recently. This is the first kind of informational webinar we're giving on the program. And the program will remain open until the earlier of when all the funding is exhausted or December 31st, 2020. The program will accept applications on an ongoing basis, so you're welcome to submit one today or in a month from now or in 2 months from now, until we've notified on our website that potentially the funding may have run out. If the program anticipates running out of funding, there will be a notice posted on our program webpage, or you can always reach out to us in advance of submitting an application just to double check. The program is for clean energy technology demonstration projects. So those projects would be led by a startup company who is demonstrating a product that falls between the technology readiness levels of 5 and 8. Again, we'll get into more specifics on all these points in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Here are kind of the two overarching program goals of what the value is that this program is trying to provide to the ecosystem. One is to accelerate the commercialization of clean energy technologies between TRL 5, which I have defined there in parentheses, and TRL 8, which is also further defined there in parentheses. Basically, you must have a product that's ready to be validated more or less in the field, in a real world experience. To provide funding for demonstration projects to test and measure the performance of innovative clean energy technologies. So that's the overarching second program goal there. Next slide, please. Now we'll get into some more of the program specifics. First, we will cover the applicant eligibility. Specifically covering this first and foremost, since this is what I would consider the biggest change from recent rounds of the program. As I mentioned previously, the program was restricted to Massachusetts-based startups. However, we are expanding that eligibility as defined here. So the program defines an applicant team as being comprised of at least one clean energy company, which we will call the lead applicant. So the clean energy company or the startup or the small business would be the lead applicant, and they must be a clean energy company. In combination with one demonstration partner, which would be the host site, so wherever you're going to demonstrate the technology. So that, at the least, would be an applicant team. Of course, applicant teams can be made up of more than one clean energy company or more than one demonstration partner. This bullet here just defines the minimum composition of that applicant team, 1 and 1. Now, the second part here, the applicant team options, again, gets into more of these specifics. So there's really kind of two broad options here. Option 1, you would have a Massachusetts-based clean energy company or startup with a demonstration site anywhere in the US. Or you could have a non-Massachusetts-based clean energy company or startup with a demonstration site here in Massachusetts. So that is the kind of contingency there if you're an out-of-state startup that would like to apply. You must have a demonstration site in Massachusetts, and the technology that you are hoping to demonstrate should fall within one of the 4 priority areas, which we will describe in a later slide. They are basically 4 areas of clean technology demonstrations that the Commonwealth cares particularly about their energy priorities. And we'll talk about those in subsequent slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. And now we'll get into some of the project technology eligibility criteria. So first and foremost, no matter who you are or where you're from, all projects must meet Mass CEC's definition of clean energy, which is defined here. Obviously, you can read it here. You can also click the link. We will share the slides. But anything that is energy efficiency, demand response, renewable energy, anything that meets our enabling legislation. Next slide, please. Now, the second part of this project technology eligibility, as I mentioned earlier, InnovateMass will place particular emphasis on projects in the following 4 priority areas, which are the Commonwealth energy priorities. So 1, building level energy usage, 2, clean transportation, 3, offshore wind, and 4, net zero grid. So generally, no matter who you are or where you're applying from, no matter what type of project you're proposing, we will emphasize those 4 areas. However, you're not restricted to demonstrating a product that falls within one of those areas unless you're a non-Massachusetts lead applicant or a non-Massachusetts-based startup who is leading the project. If you are a non-Massachusetts-based lead applicant, you must have a demonstration site in Massachusetts, and the proposed technology must fall within one of those 4 priority areas I just described. Next slide, please. So we realized that with this change in the program where we are opening eligibility to out-of-state startups, we realized that many of those out-of-state startups might not necessarily have the Massachusetts connections and not necessarily be able to easily secure a demonstration site. So as a result of that, we put together a InnovateMass Slack channel. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Slack, it's basically just a kind of a fancy chat room that you can use online to help collaborate. So we have certain channels set up that people can talk on, and you could just join and say, hi, my name is Leslie, and I have a clean transportation technology I want to demonstrate in Massachusetts. And that's all you really have to say. It doesn't have to be super detailed, just kind of introduce yourself. And there will be a variety of people on our end who will be checking this channel daily to sort of help facilitate connections for you. So if you're struggling to secure a site or a partner, then this is a great place for you to come and sort of throw your idea out there and let us help you. That's the unique nature of the program. So myself and Corey will check it daily. We will also have some industry partners who might have connections. They'll be checking it daily, and we'll do our best to help matchmake projects that are in need of matchmaking. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into some of the budgetary restrictions on the program. So something I mentioned earlier is that there is a cost share requirement. Earlier I said that folks can apply and request a grant of up to $250,000. But along with that request, you must also contribute some of your own funding. So the cost share requirement is a percentage of the grant amount that you're requesting. For example, if you request $200,000 from Mass CEC for your project, and the cost share requirement for your project is 50%, then you must commit to providing at least $100,000 of your own funding, 50% of the request. The cost share requirement is dependent on the demonstration site. So we have basically 2 buckets that your project might fall into. One, at least 25% would be required if you are demonstrating your technology at a public benefit project site, which I will define in a subsequent slide. But basically, it's like a publicly owned facility or a low and moderate income facility. And that's as a way for Mass CEC and the state of Massachusetts to help further clean energy access at sites that may not necessarily have as much access to clean energy projects and demonstrations. So this is a way to sort of help those projects further along with a reduced cost share burden for the project. And then the other option would be at least 50% would be required for all other projects that are not at a public benefit site. For those of you who are familiar with the program as it's run recently, it used to always be a 50% cost share. So we've kept that the same and then just reduced it for anyone at a specific project site. Lastly, at least 20% of that cost share must consist of cash, meaning it can't all be in-kind labor. The cash can come from a variety of contributions, of course, but there is a cash contribution requirement. All of the budgetary restrictions and the program as far as what's eligible, what's ineligible, and more detail about the cost share requirement specifically is all further outlined in the RFP or the request for proposals, which we have posted on our website, and I encourage everyone to review carefully. Next slide, please. Here we define what I just mentioned as the public benefit project sites. So again, public benefit project sites are eligible for reduced cost share burden, which would be 25% of the grant ask versus the 50 that everyone else would have to meet. So if the demonstration site is at one of these following sites, then you would be able to only have to contribute 25% cost share. So either Massachusetts publicly owned facilities, a low and moderate income building, which could be a single family residential home owned by someone that is less than 60% of state median income, or multifamily affordable housing building, or lastly, the third option would be a site that has direct benefits to an environmental justice community. So to give a little bit of more context on these three options here, I think the first one, Massachusetts publicly owned facilities, is relatively straightforward. The second one, we have more details on in our RFP of how we would verify that the building is what we say here. So there are certain things that the applicant can provide, like a deed restriction or a fuel assistance letter or something like that. And that's all further defined in the RFP. And then third, the environmental justice community, I have a link there to a map of the state of Massachusetts where there are defined environmental justice communities. So if the project were to fall in one of those communities and you could prove that the technology was directly benefiting that community in that way, then we could also potentially use that for verification for a 25% cost share burden. And now I will turn it back over to my colleague Corey to talk a little bit more about the program.
Thanks, Leslie. So just getting into the more granular aspects of the application process, I would strongly encourage anyone interested in applying to first check out our website, masscc.com/InnovateMass, and you'll see all of the different components of the application, which include a completed application form, a project work plan template, and a completed TRL Serial Calculation. I would recommend checking all of these things out before applying, just to get a sense of what's required. Our application form has a variety of questions that really help our team and the reviewers assess the proposal and the project team. And then the project work plan template generally is used to get a more granular sense of exactly what steps will be included in the project scope and what the rough timeline and budget of those steps are. And then a TRL Serial Calculation, that stands for Technology Readiness Level and Commercial Readiness Level. It's essentially a calculator that we have the applicants fill out and kind of self-assess whether they're in the right TRL CRL range for this program. And then upon submission of these materials, your application would be reviewed, and then if selected to advance to the finalist stage, the applicant would be invited to pitch to a panel of program judges, which would be made up of a variety of industry professionals. Applications will be accepted on a rolling basis, and pitches will be held on a periodic basis. And then just to get a bit more into the estimated timeline for applicants to plan around, it really depends on when the application is submitted. So upon submission of the application, applications undergo a technical and programmatic review, and then within 8 weeks following the submission, they would be notified of potential finalist status. If they are selected as a finalist, they would undergo pitch coaching, and that would be from that 8 weeks to about another month and a half from there. And then 2 to 4 months from the application submission, they would pitch to a panel of judges. And then about 6 weeks from that pitch, final award decisions would be made. And if the finalist was selected for an award, contracting would commence, and that would take about 2 months, and then projects could then commence from there. To get more into what we're looking for in applications from a project perspective, the first thing we look at is technical merit. So the technology is novel and interesting. It addresses a key pain point in its targeted industry application. There's also a strong commercialization potential for the technology. So the project team has a clear understanding of the target market and the proposed customers. This is really strengthened by letters of support or potentially your demonstration partner. Also demonstration that the market need exists. So this technology would be addressing a key pain point in that market and has a strong value proposition to that market. We also look at the project plan itself. So the proposed project plan is achievable within the proposed timeline and budget. And then also demonstration of this technology would result in an improved business case for the technology and the project. And also the applicant team. So we look to see if they have the relevant skills and experiences that would enable success in this project. So yeah, we're really looking for a high likelihood of success in all of these categories. Then for programmatic fit, we have a variety of technology development programs here at MassEC. These are some of the key things we look at in assessing whether this project is a good fit for this program. One, the project and the project team meet the minimum threshold eligibility requirements, as Leslie was just going through. Also, we look for benefits to the state of Massachusetts. Does the project and the technology align with the Commonwealth's energy policy? And does it complement existing or developing in-state capabilities, such as facilities, the clean energy workforce, etc. Then another thing we really focus on in all of our technology development programs is climate impact. So really looking at the total addressable carbon analysis part of the application. How large is the slice of emissions that this project and this technology is targeting? And in contrast or in complement to how we look at whether the project would be successful for that technology and that company, in programmatic fit, we really look at how that technology and that company being successful would also really matter to the Commonwealth and our ability to meet our climate goals. And now I will pass it back to my colleague, Leslie.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, and I will just reiterate what Corey said before I get into more of the application form requirements, is to definitely check out the materials that are on our program webpage. There are basically two required application forms. So there's one, the application form itself, which you'll find on our webpage, which has all of the bulleted information you see here. Overview of technology, you'll list your target market, the role of the project and how that will further advance you into that market, your project plan that will be executed under the InnovateMass grant, what your climate impact will be. So that is the section Corey just alluded to that gets into the total addressable carbon analysis. Basically, we just want the applicant to try to quantify to the best of their ability where they see their technology going and how that will impact our climate. So it's scalable, of course. You can put a number that says, you know, if this is market adopted in my beachhead market, here's what I project the carbon emission reduction numbers to be. If I hit my full addressable target market, then here's where I think my numbers will be. And we do have some resources on our website that can help you quantify this, including like the EPA calculator and some more privately used calculators as well. And lastly, we do want to hear about the benefits to Massachusetts and the benefits to you and your company. So the application form itself is the first document that you'll have to submit, which contains everything I just mentioned. And then the second document that you'll have to submit that we provide is the work plan template, which is an Excel document. And that has two tabs, one for the work plan information and one for the budget information. So I'll get into all of that in the next couple of slides. So here is a screenshot of the top half of one of those tabs. So as I just mentioned, the work plan template is an Excel document, and there's two tabs. So the first tab is the work plan information, which you see a snapshot of here. The milestones are basically what are you going to do and when are you going to do it. So this more or less kind of structures the project plan. We operate at Mass EC on a milestone deliverable basis. So once you achieve a milestone, then you will submit the associated deliverables to Mass EC, and then we'll remit the payment. So that's just more or less how our grants operate across the board at Mass EC. So the milestones here will just want to see, what you're targeting to do. Of course, if you're actually selected, we'll get into more detailed discussion about this project work plan and these milestones. This doesn't have to be set in stone. We just kind of need an idea of what you're thinking for the project up front. Next slide, please. And then here's the second half of that project work plan tab. So the top half just lists out the milestones, and then the bottom half lists out the deliverables. So these are the specific deliverables that you will generate as a result of that milestone being achieved. So a deliverable is something you'll actually send to Mass CEC to prove work was done. It could be pictures of an installation, it could be a schematic of proposed design, it could be a number of items, but it's an actual something that will be submitted, and that something proves that you've achieved that milestone in your work plan. And again, this will all be touched on in a lot more detail if you're awarded and we're negotiating the final scope of work. Next tab, please. Next slide, please. Okay, and here is the other tab to that worksheet. This is the budget. So again, we don't have to get into the specifics here, but basically we just want to know how much will the project cost, who is contributing what funding, who's working for you. We like to see the staff members, not their names per se, but their titles and what their hourly rate is and how many hours they plan to contribute to the project. If you're getting any subcontractors assigned to the project, if you need to sub out work. So this basically is just the whole budget of your project. And again, if awarded, we will talk through this in a lot more detail. It's just for us to get an idea at the application phase. Next slide, please. So the last thing I wanted to touch on before I pass it back to Corey is just to give everyone a picture of a type of project that we have funded and that has basically been successfully completed under the InnovateMass program. Before I get into this particular success story, I do want to point out that there are a lot more projects that we funded that are listed on our InnovateMass webpage. So when you're checking out the RFP and the application materials, please feel free to scroll down and find that table that lists some more projects, again, to give you an idea of the types of projects that we've funded and have been successful. So this particular company is Blackburn Energy. Blackburn Energy is an Amesbury-based startup, so Amesbury here in Massachusetts. They are developing software-driven hardware, which they call RelGen, and it harvests wasted energy from things like braking in heavy-duty freight trucks to power the sleeper cabs or the lift gates. So it's a great transportation story here. The company was awarded in the 7th round of InnovateMass, so somewhat recently, maybe about 2 years ago, I would say. And we provided them with $127,000 roughly grant, and they provided a matching cost share of $73,000 roughly. They demonstrated their RelGen product in 20 trucks on the road under the grant. So that was their demonstration, and that's what they sort of scoped out in their project plan, was this 20 truck on the road demonstration. And they also collected data and put together some reports and things to use with future customers to prove out their product that it works. They have recently formed 3 strategic partnerships, including Toyota. So that was a great success for them as an outcome of the project. And now I will pass it on to Corey.
Thank you, Leslie. just to kind of get into some FAQs that our team has drafted preemptively, and kind of give a head start to our question and answer period at the end. So a question we get a lot is how the cost share works. Leslie kind of scoped out the different qualifiers for the cost share requirement. So if you're a public benefit or a public interest demonstrator, then that would be about 25% of the grant request, and then for everyone else, that would be 50% minimum of the grant request. Regardless of the percentage of the grant request of the cost share itself, at least 20% must be cash provided by the company going to the project, and then up to 80% can be made up of in-kind labor or services going to the project. Another question that's really important for eligibility is what qualifies as clean energy. This is defined in the General Laws of Massachusetts, Section 1, Chapter 23J, which defines clean tech as advanced and applied technologies that significantly reduce or eliminate the use of energy from non-renewable sources, including but not limited to energy efficiency, demand response, energy conservation, and those technologies powered in whole or in part by the sun, wind, water, biomass, alcohol, wood, fuel cells, any renewable, non-depletable, or recyclable fuel. So that's pretty long, but I would encourage you to check out this section of the General Laws of Massachusetts. Then another question is, what is the expected duration of the project? Awardees are given 24 months to complete the demonstration project. Typically, projects last between 1 year and 2 years. Another question is, what is considered to be eligible budget items? So what can the grant be spent on in the budget? Please refer to this section of the RFP. It lists out different expenses that can be covered under the grant. And with all of the expenses that can be covered under the grant, it is necessary for the applicant team to justify the item and say why it is necessary for the project. Does the project site have to be in Massachusetts? So Leslie covered this a bit earlier, but just to reiterate, Massachusetts-based companies do not have to have a Massachusetts-based project site. However, non-Massachusetts-based companies do have to have a Massachusetts-based project site to really demonstrate that their technology is solving a problem or contributing to an industry important to the Commonwealth. What defines a Massachusetts-based company? So it must have a majority of the following in Massachusetts: primary sales and marketing, primary manufacturing operations, company headquarters, and that means the executive staff are based in Massachusetts, and primary research and development operations. And by a majority, we mean if all 4 of these things apply to your company, then 3 of the 4 must be based in Massachusetts. And if, say, only 3 apply to your company, say your company doesn't have manufacturing operations, then 2 must be based in Massachusetts. And with that, thank you. We will now begin our question and answer period. Again, please submit your questions in the question box and we'll get to as many as we can. Feel free also to email any questions that arise now or later to innovate@masscc.com, and also check out our website and the Slack channel. And also, just to reiterate, a recording of the webinar will be posted on our website and sent to the attendees within about a week of this webinar. One question, is there any tenure requirement for a Massachusetts-based company?
That's a great question. So I think what they're trying to get at is like, is it okay if you've just moved to Massachusetts versus if you've been in Massachusetts as a company for a number of years? So the answer is no, we do not have a tenure requirement as far as length of being in Massachusetts, but you do need to be in Massachusetts for you to be eligible for the InnovateMass program, or at least meet the majority description that Corey just stated. There is a size requirement for all startups, which again are further outlined in the RFP, but startup is a very loose word, but we do use the small business definition of what a small business is. So just reviewing that, it's a federal definition, it's pretty standard. We tend to use it in a lot of our programs. So that is something to review as far as size eligibility. Figured I'd just cover that one in the same answer there, but great question.
Thanks, Leslie. We have a budget question. Is buying materials or parts considered a cash contribution?
Great question. Yes, materials, if you were to purchase them, would be considered cash contribution.
Great. Would a state university qualify as a Massachusetts publicly owned facility?
Again, great question. And yes, I would say if it's a public university or public college, then yes, it would be a public benefit site to fulfill the Massachusetts-based public entity option.
Great. And then we've had a few questions on building level energy usage as a priority area. Could you maybe describe a bit more what types of projects or technologies would fall into this category?
Yes, sure. So for when we say buildings level energy usage, basically we mean anything that directly decreases the emissions associated with the primary activities in residential or commercial buildings. Not saying anything I'm about to say is exclusive, but for instance, like a heat pump or an insulation material or a lighting material. So anything that would decrease the emissions within that building and that energy usage within that building. Contrary to something else we had in there as a priority area, which is the net zero grid, just again to sort of help further beef out some of these terms here. When we say net zero grid, we just mean anything that has to do with activity moving electricity back and forth between generators and end users. So between the generator and the building, for example. But once it enters the building or is on the building, then it's considered building level energy usage. So, things like, utility scale storage or smart meters or, something along those lines that are more grid level efficiency technologies or demonstration projects or business models or anything like that. So that's sort of how we look at it is, building level versus the grid level. So anything that falls into those two categories for those. If, of course, you have a particular technology you're thinking of and you're still not 100% sure based on what I just said or based on what's in the RFP, you can always reach out to us at innovate@masscc.com and set up a call with us or ask an email question, and we're happy to kind of talk through if we think your technology particularly falls within this particular priority area or not. That is the nice nature of this program now being rolling and accepting applications on an ongoing basis. We can help answer questions also on an ongoing basis, so that's a great option.
Thanks, Leslie. Does a project have to wait for notice of award before beginning the project, or can it still be eligible for award if it's already in process while it's being reviewed?
So the project that you propose under the InnovateMass grant that you would be applying for funding for should not have started if you are applying for funding. But if you're, it gets a little hairy because of course, as let's say you're a startup and you're innovating on a technology and this has been your life's work, you've made progress thus far. We're not telling you to stop making technology development progress while you're waiting for our potential funding. It's just that there should be an actual project that is being proposed that you will start after you potentially receive the funding from us. So, for example, if you're a solar panel person and you have a solar panel, you can keep innovating on your solar panel, of course, as part of your company and your business. But let's say you're proposing to install that solar panel at, a UMass, then that particular installation at that particular site should not take place until you've been awarded, since that's what you're applying for funding for. Hopefully that helps clarify that a little bit.
Thanks. If a company has won an InnovateMass grant previously, are they still eligible to apply again?
Great question. So that one's a little tricky. So the answer initially, the short answer would be most likely no, but it depends. If your company, completed an InnovateMass project successfully a while ago and now has a new product or a new application of the product, and there's further innovation and technology development that needs to be done to bring it to market, again, you could reach out to us. I think that might be a discussion I'm willing to have. But the purpose of the program is to take technologies from that, 5 to 8 TRL range and bring them further to market. So in theory, a successful Innovate project will then be, past the Innovate stage at the end of the Innovate project, but there might be another product that you're working on that's completely separate from that first product, in which case we might discuss that. So there is not a ineligibility around an applicant, a grantee applying again, but we would need to understand how it's separate and different from the last project, and how and why it's so valuable to you to come back to us. So again, I think that might be one of those kind of custom discussions we'd have with you prior to applying to hear the situation.
Great, thank you. So for applicants interested in demonstrating their technology with a public interest site, such as public housing, how would you recommend they go about finding these sites or reaching out to potential sites or organizations?
Great question. So, of course, the company, the startup, is welcome to do some of their own cold calling research and outreach, or use their own connections. But we did create the Slack channel for this type of purpose. So if you think that your product should, would ultimately really benefit something like a multifamily affordable housing building. Let's say you have some kind of building level product that would do really well with a lot of units and serve a low moderate income community really well. It's cheaper, it's great, and that's a great use case for you. Then, you can reach out to Mass CEC. You could express this on the Slack channel. And Mass CEC will see that and use our potential connections to put you in touch with someone, or hear a little bit more about what you're thinking for the project, and we might be able to connect you with someone. Or, like I said, you're welcome to, of course, use your own resources as well. So any of those options would be a great way to sort of make those connections for a particular project site.
Thank you. Is InnovateMass prioritizing any specific type of demonstration site, such as nonprofit, public institution, etc.?
No, we are not prioritizing the demonstration sites. I would say in our evaluation of the projects and the applications, the only prioritization is really given on an evaluative basis. So if your project really shows that the demonstration site's appropriate for the technology and will bring your technology further to market and really be a valuable demonstration site, that would be something, I guess, inadvertently we might prioritize just by our evaluation, but we do not have any higher priority project sites that we're looking at.
Great, thanks. So We've stated that the application window is rolling and ends on December 31st, 2020. Will the program open up again in 2021?
Yeah, that is a great question. So the program has a set amount of budget right now. So that's why we're keeping it rolling to allow for this sort of matchmaking process and asking continuous questions. But sometime over the next year, we do hope to gain another round of funding so we can keep the program open beyond December. You know, in an ideal world, we might not have to close it if we line it up right with acquiring more funding before then. But at this point, it is uncertain. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we will communicate on our webpage if there is a chance that we anticipate the funding running out before December 31st. Otherwise, it will run to at least December 31st.
Great, thanks. Thinking through planning and timing for applicant teams, is there any ballpark estimate or approximate timing of the quarterly pitch dates, or would they evolve kind of as the application period progresses?
Yeah, that is a great question also. So this is the first time that we are doing a rolling program like this for Innovate. So in our minds, we sort of have a loose schedule of what we'd like, but it does depend on the applications we get in to sort of have a need for the pitch days. But we want to also at the same time be respectful of everyone's project windows. You know, so if you apply to us, let's say today, we will adhere to those approximate timelines we have on our webpage and then the RFP and in the slide here where we said, you know, within X number of weeks, you'll have received finalist status. Within X number of weeks after that, there will be a pitch day. So it is based on sort of your application submission day, just so we're cognizant and respectful that a project window is only so long. And if we take too long, you might lose that project window. So we will, of course, adhere to the loose schedule we posted. In our minds, of course, we'd love to get applications in next week and then have our first pitch day maybe in early fall, you know, maybe 2-3 months from now. That would be more or less what Mass EC typically does under these solicitations. But we'll have to just sort of see when the first applications roll in. Hopefully that answers that question. If not, let me know that person.
Thanks. Do projects designed for more indirect support of some of the pillars mentioned, such as EV charging from renewable sources, do those count as contributing to one of the 4 pillars mentioned earlier?
I think if I'm understanding it correctly, the answer would be yes. I mean, if it's something that indirectly benefits EV charging, then, you know, as long as you can make that connection clearly, then yes, I would say that would fall under clean transportation pillar area. But again, for specifics on a specific project and technology, feel free to just ask us a question and let us know. But a general guideline for everyone on the call, if you're not sure if you fall in a priority area, then the best way to figure that out is 1, ask us, and then 2, also really, even before you ask us, have a valid and detailed justification. So if you can connect those dots and draw those lines, then we should be able to too, but it has to be like a clear case that this connects to this and will directly benefit, you know, this. So as long as that connection is obvious and clear, then I'm sure we will also see it that way. But it's always good to reach out and ask.
Definitely. Does net zero grid as a pillar include renewable energy generation and integration into the grid?
Yeah, it does. If especially, you know, the renewable energy generation is helping the grid, that absolutely would count in that category, as long as it's not like some off-grid application and for something like that, which we've seen, which is great, but not potentially for net zero grid per se. But yeah, generally yes, that answer would be yes.
Great. So if an applicant applied and did not make it to the finalist stage, would they receive feedback, and would they have the option of reapplying with a revised application package?
Yes. So yes, there's always feedback given, and yes, you are welcome to reapply up to 3 times, and this is spelled out more in the RFP. But basically, as long as you can really demonstrate that something has changed in your concept or in your proposal, that you've taken that feedback and you've made you know, concerted effort there to change something, or if something in the market has changed, you know, if a new huge regulation comes out that totally changes the landscape for your particular technology. So any of those things, then you are welcome to apply up to 3 times if any of those are true. Yes.
Great, thank you. Does a startup need to be formally incorporated somewhere rather than an incubator within another business?
A tricky question. I'm not sure I'm 100% understanding, but we don't have requirements over where a company is incorporated, for example, as long as the majority of the operations are based in Massachusetts to meet the Massachusetts-based requirement. But if you're not trying to meet that Massachusetts-based requirement, then again, your operations can be anywhere. But as far as, you know, being incorporated, no, we don't require that you're incorporated in Massachusetts. You can, a lot of our startups are incorporated in Delaware, for example, and that's fine. It's just more or less where your business operations are based rather than incorporated as far as the program restrictions go.
Great, thanks. For university development or university developed technologies that are currently being spun out of the university but are not yet a commercial entity, can that kind of developing technology and applicant team submit an application before they are a commercial entity, so long as the establishment is made before the award is issued?
So that's an interesting question, but so the way our RFP defines the lead applicant, which I've referred to a couple of times here, the lead applicant should be a clean energy company. So it specifically does define that as company. However, as I mentioned, the applicant team can be made up of multiple entities. So if you're, for instance, at a university, but you have another partner that is a company already, then you could partner, have them be the lead, and you just be on the project. But in order to be the applier and the lead of this project, then you do need to be a company. So that's sort of a restriction around the program. But as I said, you can partner with a company if you're not quite there yet. Otherwise, I'd advise that you wait until you're technically a business or company.
Great, thank you. Are there any other kind of parameters around corporate structures for lead applicants?
No, we don't have any corporate structure requirements. All the eligibility criteria for the lead applicant is outlined in the RFP. So, and that part is not there as far as corporate structure or where you're incorporated. So if it's not listed in the RFP, that means we don't have a restriction around it. All the restrictions would be outlined in the RFP. Just, I know that sounds silly to clarify, but just wanted to point that out. The only thing, as I mentioned, is that you have to meet the small business requirement, meaning you can't be a large corporation or something like that. You know, you have to be a startup, a small business startup. And then again, the Massachusetts-based thing, if that's part of what you're looking for the project. But we don't have any corporate structure type requirements.
Great, thank you. give about another minute or so for any attendees to submit some last questions.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize or stress in case we don't have another one, this webinar was just the first, assuming we don't run out of funding before December 31st, we will have another webinar in the fall to kind of remind people and go back over some of these things. Mass CEC Slack channel is always there, and also the email address to please reach out, and we'll get back to you about your specifics on the projects. I know a lot of folks are probably brainstorming ideas. They might have really specific project questions for us, and that's fine. We'll do our best to get back to you and answer those. And as I said earlier, please read the RFP and all the material on the website. There's a lot more content in there than was presented today. This was kind of just the high-level summary and basically the big overview, but there is a lot more content on the website.
Great, thank you. And as a couple last questions, one regarding lead applicant status. If a manufacturer is outside of the United States, but a partnered installer or distributor is based in Massachusetts, who would be the lead applicant?
Yeah, so the lead applicant is the company, the entity that meets the small business definition and is a clean energy company also by definition. So as long as you're those two things, then you would be defined as the lead applicant. And then some of the kind of responsibilities of the lead applicant, so what would make the most sense for the structure and the partnership is the lead applicant's the one that's primarily responsible for contracting with Mass CEC, that is going to receive payments from Mass CEC, that is going to sort of drive the project. And there may be partners like a manufacturer or like the demonstration site that will benefit from the project and work on the project, but the lead is exactly that. They're the project leader, they're the applicant, and they must meet all of the eligibility requirements outlined in the RFP for a lead applicant. So if you have a manufacturer outside the US, I probably wouldn't suggest they be the lead applicant. I don't think that would make the most sense. I would think that this Massachusetts-based entity would probably make the most sense, especially since they'll be the local installer kind of driving the whole project.
Great, thanks. And then another question, does winning an InnovateMass award affect eligibility for InnovateMass?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a frequently asked question across all of our technology development programs. So no, it does not make you ineligible. So you can have received a Catalyst or an Amplify award and still apply to Innovate. The only sort of asterisk on that is we don't typically award two projects at the same time. So if you've just been awarded an Amplify project and you wanted to apply to us, that might not necessarily be the best move. It's usually good to demonstrate that you've completed the one grant you do have, or at least are close to completing it, before we give another award, just to sort of demonstrate that track record as a grantee, rather than giving out 2-3 awards at the same time to the entity. We typically stick to a one at a time policy across the tech dev grant programs.
Great, thank you. And then as a final question, are there any ownership requirements for small businesses looking to be a lead applicant? For example, do they have to be owned by a US citizen?
No, we don't have any requirements on the lead applicant besides that you must be a small business. So anything that's outlined in that small business definition through the federal government is what we adhere to. So as long as it meets that, then it's fine by us.
Great, thank you. I think that will conclude our webinar presentation on InnovateMass today. Again, please feel free to reach out to us through any of the avenues mentioned, our email, the Slack channel, check out the website. and we will be posting a recording of this webinar shortly. Thank you everyone for attending and participating today.